We here at Perpetual Life wish to achieve indefinitely extended lifespans, and we embrace the use of technologies that help us all toward these goals. We see the world become a peaceful and perfect place. We see brotherly love prevail in all instances and envision a future in which mankind works together for our common good. Let us set examples ourselves by sharing our skills and abilities as well as our bounty with those in need. Let us find ways to use current technologies and develop future technologies that brings humanity together as we work to eradicate all forms of catastrophes and the final elimination of every disease that plagues mankind, especially aging. To those of you who are members here, those of you that I call my Perpetual Life family, we are all family in that we aspire toward unlimited lifespans. And let us recall that it does not matter if we call ourselves Protestant or Hindu, Muslim, Jew, Catholic, Buddhist, atheist, or agnostic. It does not matter. We can mutually respect one another's belief systems while we come together, united in our quest for health and longevity. So please join me in a moment of reflection with these words from Mother Teresa. People are often unreasonable and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of ulterior motives, but be kind anyway. If you are honest, people may cheat you, but be honest anyway. If you find happiness, people may be jealous, but be happy anyway. The good you do today may be forgotten tomorrow, but do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and still it may never be enough, but give the world your best anyway. For you see, in the end, it is between you and God, or Creator, whatever you name that universal force. It was never between you and them anyway. This is from Mother Teresa. So with our friends beside us and no person beneath us, with the bonds of perpetual life between us and our worries behind us, with our goals before us and no task that is beyond us, with a thirst for knowledge and a dream for a disease and aging-free world, we are thankful for our Perpetual Life friends and the lessons and knowledge that we are about to share here this evening. So thank you and welcome to Perpetual Life. Let us now welcome a great leader in the movement to eliminate aging, Mr. Bill Faloon.
Neil, those words were so inspiring. Before I begin this prelude to an incredible presentation you're going to watch by Dr. Dipnarine Maharaj, I'm going to do a little prelude here, and I do want to make a notation. I want to essentially honor and pay tribute to an individual who has made such a difference in this world that we tend to forget, because he made such a significant difference that we don't even remember how bad it was. Before Jonas Salk went through an incredible effort to combat anti-Semitism. He combated persecution, oppression, and ridicule to develop the polio vaccine. And he had to work in inferior laboratories. He was not given access to what others had access to. He persevered anyway. And we need to put a pedestal up in this church to honor the work he did, because he is the embodiment of what mankind was created for. Jonas Salk sought ways to extend lifespan, to prevent premature death, to fulfill the Creator's plan for mankind to develop technologies that will facilitate the transformation of life into an environment of perpetual abundance. Now, again, polio, because it's been gone so long, we tend to forget how bad it was. But just 6 months after I was born, and I was born in 1954, by the way, I'm 60 years of age, but 6 months after I was born, Jonas Salk held a conference, maybe somewhat similar to this, where he announced a breakthrough, the discovery of a vaccine that, if given to people ahead of time, would protect them from polio. This was an enormous breakthrough because 45,000 Americans a year were contracting polio and either dying or being paralyzed for life. But this one individual, he persevered through all kinds of oppression and prejudice. And by the way, he broke all kinds of FDA rules. He wasn't allowed to do what he did, but he knew he had a way to prevent this disease from affecting people, and he pushed forward anyway. The result is, by 1962, only 910 Americans contracted polio, down from 45,000 in 1955. He truly is an embodiment of what the Creator wanted mankind to accomplish. And I like maps, I hope some of you do, but if you look at that map up there, 1988, hey, we were all born for the most part in 1988, and yet most of the world still suffered the horrific afflictions of polio. Most of the world did, and yet look at 2012. Look at that. Only 3 countries still had polio as a concern. Those were Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. The whole world was inoculated against the polio virus. This is an incredible breakthrough. Now, some people question whether or not we're ever going to find a cure for aging, whether or not we will be able to indefinitely extend healthy human lifespans. Well, just look at this map. It's not going to happen overnight. It's actually going to happen to a few people in the beginning, and then maybe a country or two will develop it. But just think, if aging were the example instead of polio. In 1988, let's assume we cured aging in those countries in white, but aging still existed in those countries in red, which represent the majority of the world, by the way. And look what happened by 2012. It's gone. It's vanquished. People wouldn't even talk about it anymore. They'd say, well, of course you cured aging. People don't get sick anymore like they used to. That's all something of the past. So this is an example of what mankind is able to accomplish if they have enough perseverance, if they utilize their talents, and if they overcome bureaucratic barriers that deny us the access to life-saving therapies. The topic of this presentation tonight is an experimental program that's being initiated to reverse the aging process in human beings. Now, this technique, by the way, was initially looked at in the 1970s. They found that if they connected an old rat about to die with a young rat, if they just did a blood transfusion, they were able to rejuvenate that older rat. They were able to reverse the aging of that older rat. That technology, though, kind of sat idle for a number of decades. But just last year, the most prestigious medical facilities in the United States, I'm talking about Harvard, I'm talking about Stanford, I'm talking about Carnegie Mellon, they are launching programs right now to identify what is in young human blood that could enable, if transferred into an older person, enable that person to be restored to a youthful state. And what they're finding now on preliminary bases using animal studies, that the brains of older animals can be rejuvenated, can be brought back into a more youthful, functional, and structural condition. This is earth-shattering, and it is making the news, by the way. If you read the newspapers every single day, you'll read some news releases from Harvard and other media sources where they'll talk about what research is being shown in the laboratories as far as the animal work. And now everyone's looking to think, well, how can we do this with humans? Problem is, it's being done too slow. It needs to be accelerated, and that's what Dr. Maharaj is going to talk about, accelerating the pace of research so that human beings today can benefit from this incredible technology. So as I said, young blood put into old animals rejuvenates their brain. It rejuvenates their blood vessels. It rejuvenates their immune system. It rejuvenates their muscles and their bone. They become younger in response to that. So this is the technology that we're looking at tonight as a potential way of reversing aging in human beings. This is, as I said, earth-shattering. This event may be historical from the standpoint of the announcements we're making. And as I said before, the major medical research centers in the United States, Stanford, Harvard, Carnegie Mellon, and others, are pursuing this. The technical term, by the way, is parabiosis, as far as taking young blood constituents and putting them into older organisms and seeing the reversal of aging. Parabiosis, it's occurring. And these little news clips that I'm showing you right now, they're very recent. Some of them are year 2015 or 2014 press releases that were sent out showing that this technology works. It's no longer theoretical. It works. It just, we need to perfect it in humans. And I'm confident Dr. Maharaj may have perfected it, or at least enabled it to show efficacy in a frail, aging human being. Dr. Jarvik, his brother, by the way, the Jarvik heart developer, is rather famous, but this particular brother of Dr. Jarvik, he is looking to enable this age reversal using the parabiosis technology on pets. He's not equipped yet to do it on humans, and he knows that he can make cats and dogs respond, so he plans a study in which he's going to take people's pets. And people seem sometimes to be more attached to their pets than they are to other humans. So he's hoping that people will essentially donate their old pets to him and let him try to rejuvenate them, to let those pets live longer and behave younger. And you'll see at the very bottom of this slide something called GDF11. That's one of the youth factors in younger blood that we feel can rejuvenate older people. GDF stands for Growth Differentiating Factor 11. What does that do? It programs old stem cells to come back to life, to restore functionality, so that by transplanting GDF11 from younger people into older people, we anticipate that there will be a revival of their dormant stem cells, which would mean systemic rejuvenation. We're seeing it in every body part they've investigated so far. We're going to measure it across the board with older people to see what kind of reversal of aging we're able to identify. So we've got people from major universities working on this fervorously. Our concern is they're not going to move fast enough. Certain people in this room may not live long enough to benefit from this incredible technology. What I'm going to go through now, rather briefly by the way, and these slides will be available on the Church of Perpetual Life's website. So if you fear you're missing something here, be assured within a month you'll be able to watch these anytime you want through the internet. But what I'm going to try to do is introduce some very simple concepts of immune senescence, so that when you hear Dr. Maharaj talking about what he plans to do to reverse it, you'll have an understanding of the terminology and the mechanisms involved. What we all want to have in our bodies as we grow older are more naive T cells. Now, naive may sound like something you don't want. It may sound like something it doesn't know what it's doing. But as it relates to immunology, naive means it's a cell that has not yet been stimulated to react against a particular bacteria or virus or cancer cell. It's ready to act as soon as you are infected or as soon as a pre-malignant lesion develops in your body, it's ready to take it out. As we grow older, unfortunately, we develop lots of memory cells. They protect us against existing bacteria, viruses, and cancers that we've been exposed to in the past, but they don't protect us against the new cells. In fact, these old memory cells, they emit inflammatory signals, which creates all kinds of disorders. And to give you an idea as to how this works, young people, children, they get sick a lot. They get lots of colds, and they respond to those colds, though, rather well, but they're sick for a couple days, a couple weeks. And the reason is they don't have memory cells like almost everyone in this room has. We've got lots of memory cells that protect us against prior infections. But as we use up our naive cells and they convert to memory cells, we develop a deficiency in our naive T cell population. Eventually, that deficiency evolves into immune senescence. And that means we're vulnerable to everything. And we're also at the same time not just having weakened immune system against what we don't want in our bodies, such as bacteria, viruses, cancer cells, but we're having a chronic inflammatory reaction. Those memory cells are turning senile or emitting these inflammatory cytokines and creating all kind of havoc. So our dilemma that we need to overcome is we've got too many memory cells. All of us in this room have been through too much already, so we've got a nice store of memory cells that are rapidly turning senile, by the way. We don't have enough of those critical naive T cells. That's what we need to do to restore immune function back down to that of a younger person. So that is one of our objectives. More naive cells will enable us to fend off cancers, viruses, bacteria, and just about everything else out there that's killing people. When you hear that someone's died of old age, they don't really tell you what really caused it. Really, for most people, it was immune senescence. They didn't have enough naive T cells to kill the bacteria or viral infection that caused them to have pneumonia or sepsis or develop a malignancy that could have been prevented if they were younger, if only they had more naive T cells in their body. So this is what we're trying to do. We want to promote naive cell in our thymus. We want more naive cell production, and we want to get rid of the senescent memory cells. If you look at this chart, look at inflammation. Look at all of the horrific effects that inflammation has on our aging bodies. And then you see what's causing some of that inflammation. It's the accumulation of senescent memory cells. They become defective. They start emitting bad signals, telling your body to start reacting against itself. And that appears acutely in certain rheumatoid conditions. People with severe arthritis, lupus, other types of rheumatoid type conditions, and yet we're not addressing it properly. We're giving people drugs to relieve their pain instead of drugs that will get rid of those senescent memory cells. So this is certainly an area of incredible importance. Natural killer cells. These are very active when we're young. It's another immune component. And of course, naive natural killer cells are what you want. They lose their activity as we grow older. And as a result, we don't attack viruses and bacteria the way we should. That little diagram there is a macrophage going after a bacteria. It's chasing it. It's chasing it. You can see how large that macrophage is, and it's just going after that little bacteria. And you wonder, how does it see it? Does the macrophage have eyes? And no, that's not the reason. There's a chemical trail that bacteria is leaving, and that macrophage is following the chemical trail until it can engulf and destroy that bacteria. So you're looking at part of the immune system in action right now. And natural killer cells play a big part in the initial attack against bacteria, viruses, malignant cells, funguses. Everything we need to stay alive is dependent on healthy immune function. So we need to maintain healthy, functional, natural killer cell activity. Now, a percentage that we'd all like to shoot for is over 30% natural killer cell activity. And yet a typical cancer patient, when they're diagnosed, has less than 4% natural killer cell activity. It's pretty easy to understand by that one statistic why, as we grow older, cancer becomes more prevalent. Or if we're given immune suppressing drugs like so many organ transplant patients have to, their risks of cancer increase markedly. You need functional natural killer cells, and as we grow older, we lose the function, but there are ways to restore it. That's some of the information you're going to hear tonight from Dr. Maharaj. So as we go on, reasons why we are accelerating our immune senescence are chronic viral infections. Now, shingles is something that, as most of you may know, is a reactivation of the chickenpox virus. Now, why can we get chickenpox at 8 or 9 or 12 and it goes into remission? We feel like we're immune to chickenpox. Well, we're not really immune to it. What's happened is antibodies have developed, and our natural killer cells and our naive T cells, they're keeping it in remission. But at some point, our immune system starts to wear out. It's no longer able to keep that latent chickenpox virus called herpes zoster, not able to keep it suppressed, and one has a shingles outbreak. Very painful, can last for many, many months. Influenza. A younger person can get it, normally survive. Influenza kills over 30,000 Americans every year, most of them older. And they'll put it on the obituary that a person may have died from pneumonia caused by influenza. What they omit is the underlying reason why the person died, immune senescence. That was the reason why they died. One of the factors that accelerates immune senescence is the cytomegalovirus. Virtually everyone in this room is infected with CMV, cytomegalovirus. And the problem is, just like with the chickenpox virus, we don't really know we have cytomegalovirus because our immune system works overtime to keep it suppressed. But in the process of suppressing CMV, you're wearing out your naive T cell pool. It's generating all these naive T cells, not to kill a cancer cell or a bacteria or another new virus. It's simply keeping your cytomegalovirus under control, which is why older people have much more CMV. They had it all along. It's just their immune system started to wear out and it started to become detectable. So suppressing CMV, very important, not easy to do. We're hoping by transplanting the young immune systems into older individuals, we're going to enable those old individuals to suppress their chronic cytomegalovirus infections. Immune cell exhaustion. That's a scary thought, by the way. Being exhausted anyway is a scary thought. I feel great tonight. I'm not exhausted, but if we don't get good sleep, we feel tired. Unfortunately, as we get older, our immune systems will invariably wear out. They will become exhausted. We will be vulnerable to every disease that we know of, including vascular disease. It's not just cancers and viruses and bacteria. Everything, unfortunately, goes bad when our immune system wears out. And again, that chronic inflammation caused by these exhausted immune cells that no longer know how to behave. And as a result, they wind up losing an ability to protect us, but they do inflict lots and lots of damage. So again, just to reiterate what we're talking about here, we need to restore our naive T-cell populations in our bone marrow. We need to purge our body of the excess senile memory cells that aren't doing us any good except producing lots of inflammation. And that inflammation, by the way, is what produces the vascular damage and causes the strokes and the heart attacks and all the other ailments associated with arterial dysfunction. Again, T-cell function, so critical, and yet we're just accepting it. No doctor is treating for this, by the way. They take an old person who has 20 different underlying conditions, all related to immune senescence, and they're not doing anything to rejuvenate the immune system. We plan to do that. We're going to do that in a lot of different ways, and Dr. Maharaj is going to explain how that may be possible and how we intend to experimentally seek to reverse the aging process of a very frail elderly person in a way to restore not just their immune function, but their brain, their muscle, their blood vessels, and of course their bone to keep them going. I'm just about done right now with my preamble to Dr. Maharaj's presentation, but I like to use examples wherever I can. I don't know if anyone has taken better care of themselves than Jack LaLanne. He wanted to live to be over 100 more than almost anybody I know. And he tried everything. He practiced calorie restriction. He vigorously exercised. He took a modest supplement program. He was doing just about everything imaginable right. And yet, the immune dysfunction, he wasn't able to do anything about that. He developed aortic stenosis. That's something that a lot of people develop. And in response to the surgery, he developed a horrific inflammatory situation, an autoimmune problem. And then his immune system failed him further. He wound up dying of pneumonia at the early age of 96. He really felt he was going to make it to, I mean, if you saw interviews with him when he was 94, 95 even, he looked like someone who was never going to die. But his immune system was exhausted. And eventually pneumonia killed somebody who was known to do the physically impossible feats throughout his early life. He only made it to 96. And immune senescence, we know, played an incredible role. So we like to bring these issues up to let everybody know real people are really dying of this problem of immune senescence, and we need to do something about it, which is what this program is all about tonight. So again, reversing the aging process has to start with the immune system, or we're simply going to have older people who maybe have good muscle tone and strong bone density, and yet their immune systems have worn out on them. So this is the issue we're facing. And our objective is to reverse immune senescence. These are the many things that we have to do to make this happen. And if it looks like it can't happen, bear in mind, we're looking to take the immune system of a younger person and transplant that to an older person so that they get all of these benefits, perhaps with only one therapy, not having to address 6 or 7 of them as you see before you. So with that, I want to introduce Dr. Maharaj, because there are ways of protecting against immune senescence, and we hope reversing the aging process. This is your clicker? Okay.
It's such a pleasure to be here, and we thank Bill for his wonderful support of the work that we're doing, and also to achieve our objective, which is that we want everyone to become aware of what we need to do to be able to achieve healthy aging. And that's the objective. Most people are worried about their health because they're concerned about what they see happening in their parents and their grandparents. And so I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that we could do, some of the things that we've done already, that we know that since we've done it in patients who are very, very sick and they can still be alive today, well, we can go backwards. We can do it proactively, and the approach to life is really to be as proactive as possible. So my topic is healthy aging, stem cells, and your immune system. So Bill talked about what we are currently doing is that we're taking the young blood from young donors and we're giving it back to patients with cancer. And the objective now is to basically develop our studies to move on from there, to take young blood and give it back to patients with aging and the symptoms of aging. And I want to explain to you today the rationale for that. These are some of the highlights of my career. I've been performing stem cell transplantation since 1982. I was part of the pioneering team at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, where we were one of the first groups to be able to use an individual's own stem cells to be able to repair the immune system. And I'm very fortunate that one of my patients who I treated 18 years ago and using that procedure, which has now become a standard of care, is in the audience. He saw, and he's actually sitting there. So Roy, would you mind standing up and showing... Roy is a living testament to the example of that approach that we took many years ago in an experimental way, and then it is now a standard of care. In our program in Boynton Beach, what we have is a program which covers we're looking at services from the baby to right to old age. We're looking at collecting and storing cord blood stem cells for babies. For young people, we are advocating we store their stem cells when they're young. For their parents, we're saying let's measure your immune system, let's see where the holes are in your immune system. If there are any holes, let's fix it. If not, let's take your stem cells and store it. For older individuals over 65, we're saying we know that there are holes. Bill talked about immune senescence. Let's find a way to fix that. And then we take some, we freeze it, and then we continue to monitor your immune system to be able to ensure that now you have healthy aging. So our program consists of, it's a center for immune regenerative medicine. We have a stem cell cryobank where we do the cord blood banking, the adult stem cell banking as well. That's our institute where we perform the treatments, and we have a foundation that raises funds for the research. And again, we have been, the Life Extension Foundation has been very generous in supporting our research in this. This is a picture of our institute. And my objectives today is, first of all, to explain about aging of stem cells and the immune dysfunction, and how we can use a person's own stem cells for immune regenerative medicine, and how the stem cells can be affected by aging. And then finally, I want to talk about the fact that we can all do something today which would allow us to be able to prolong our lives. So a stem cell is essentially a cell which it's a unique cell which exists in every organ, but the ability of the stem cell that differentiates it from other cells is that when it divides, it always replaces itself. But it also goes on to form the tissue that it exists in. The bone marrow is the most abundant source of stem cells. And I will go into that in more detail later, but every single organ has stem cells, but the stem cells in the bone marrow have two functions. One, to form the cells of the immune system. The second is to help the stem cells in other tissues when they're being damaged to repair. So they're helper cells, but they're also forming the immune system, which is the basis of our health. This slide is basically saying the same thing, that every single organ has stem cells, but the cells with the highest potential is the bone marrow, and the highest repair potential is in the bone marrow. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is this new field of regenerative medicine. And regenerative medicine has been designated as the next evolution of medical treatments by the US Department of Health and Human Services. And what is regenerative medicine? Regenerative medicine seeks to find new treatments using stem cells for patients with severe injuries or chronic diseases in which the body's own responses do not suffice to restore functional tissue. Now, most people think that a disease process is when you begin to get symptoms, but chronic diseases occur long before that, because many of us have chronic diseases which are going on, and the major part of that is our immune system. And what we've been developing is a way that before somebody actually gets their symptoms, we can measure their immune system, we could look for the holes in their immune system, and using the techniques that we've developed to be able to use their own stem cells to be able to repair that. So what is our dream? I believe, I've put this up as my dream. Could you show me, show me the hands of those in the audience who have this same dream? And I'll read it for you. Our dream is healthy aging with a high quality of life into the late stages of our lifespan with few daily living impairments and a near absence of age-related disease. I think that's what we all want, right? Is it possible to achieve this? It is possible to achieve that. If we look at the maximal lifespan of man, we can see that it is possible to live certainly over a century. The giant tortoise actually lives to be 200 years, but I believe that it is possible for us to extend that and to have healthy aging. Why do I say that? Let's look at this young lady. This is a young lady who lived to be 115 years old, and what she did was she was healthy until she died. And when she died, she actually donated her body to medical science. And so by studying her stem cells and studying her tissues, we learned quite a lot. And one of the messages is quite simple, and I'm going to point out what the author of the paper that actually published the data about her said. So let's look at it. This article was published in New Scientist in April 24, 2014. And the article talks about the samples which were taken from this lady, and her name was Hendrike van Andelschipper. She was 115 years old when she died in 2005. And a genetic analysis of her blood and tissue samples collected during her autopsy indicated that life's outer limits might be set by our cells' finite ability to divide. So essentially what the research showed was, I'm sorry, let me get this working well. We're born with 20,000 stem cells. We are born with 20,000 stem cells. And every year, one of those stem cells divides to form the cells of the immune system in the bone marrow. We need about 1,300 of these cells. And I'm going to try and illustrate it, the same information in this slide. Think about it this way. In our bone marrow, which has stem cells, we have two compartments. One of those compartments has the 20,000 stem cells that we talked about. The other compartment forms the cells of the immune system, and Bill talked about it a lot. So this is our reserve compartment. This is our compartment that forms the cells of the immune system. We have 20,000 of these when we are born. Every year, one of these cells moves over into this compartment and forms the cells of the blood and the immune system. If we can maintain the 20,000, we can live indefinitely. But unfortunately, that does not happen, because as we age, these cells are being affected by the senescent cells that Bill talked about, because those senescent cells produces those factors which actually goes and affects these cells, and then they die off. So what happens is that as those cells are being affected by that aging blood or the aging plasma produced by the senescent cells, the cells there in that compartment, they begin to divide. And their telomeres, which are the ends of the chromosomes, which actually is like a cap on the end of a shoelace, they begin to unravel, and then the cells begin to die. We know a lot from when we studied what was done with this lady, Andelschipper's blood, because at the time that she died, she only had 2 stem cells left in the reserve compartment. And those 2 stem cells were the ones that were actually keeping her alive. When they actually disappeared, then she died. So the question is, if learning that information, which is basically the stem cells are the fountain of youth, then how could we learn from that? And the author, the study author, who was Henny Halstage, thinks that stem cells are the key. And this raises the possibility of rejuvenating aging bodies by injecting people with stem cells saved from early in their lives. And that was published in the New Scientist. So in our program, we have a program where I'm saying that everybody should collect and store their stem cells. And if we all do that, and the younger we are, the more of those stem cells from the reserve compartment we are putting away. And then what we can do is we can measure our immune system. And as we begin to see the ravages of aging coming, then we can put those cells back in. And that's called an autologous stem cell transplant. And my patient Roy, initially when I did his transplant, that's what he did. But I did it, and it was able to rejuvenate his immune system. I'm saying the same thing. He proves that this works. He proves that we can take our own stem cells and we can put it back in and we can rejuvenate our immune system, which would allow us to be able to live longer. So Bill talked about this experiment where you take it's a rejuvenation experiment, or it's called Parabiosis. And Thomas Rando at Stanford published in Nature magazine where he took the aged progenitor cells or stem cells of young mice and he actually connected the mice together. And here you see it. Young mice, what he did was he took a young mouse and then he connected it to an old mouse. And the old mouse actually, the cells moved from the young mouse into the old mouse and actually rejuvenated it. Now, these mice were what we call HLA matched. They had identical tissue, and therefore they were not rejected. But if you take somebody else's cells and you put it into your body, then several things are going to happen. Either the immune system of that person is going to fight yours, or you will fight their immune system, and there's a process that goes on which can actually create inflammation on its own. So in the United States, we do thousands of transplants like that on an annual basis, where we take a donor cells and we put it back into a patient. And yes, it does work, but there's a condition called graft versus host disease, where the immune system of the donor reacts against the person who received the cells. I'm advocating that if we have our own stem cells when we're healthy, that we can use our own stem cells and we will not get that problem, because there will be no problem with rejection. And the younger we are when we do it, the better. Again, I showed this slide to remind you that we have two compartments, and essentially what I'm doing by the processes that we're using now to treat patients, and we're doing it in older patients, is we're pushing some of these stem cells within the reserve compartment to repair the immune system of those individuals in whom we find that they've got defective immune systems. We're finding it in people who have chronic diseases or who have major diseases, that this can be done and the immune system can be repaired. So I'm now extending it and saying to people who don't have symptoms but who feel that their immune system may be going down, let's measure your immune system, and if we find it's abnormal, I will push some of these cells into here and repair their immune system, and then I will take some and collect it for the future. And the process is actually very simple, because this slide shows the bone, it shows the femur, and this is a part of the bone marrow. The cells that we're pushing over normally leave the bone marrow from that reserve compartment, and on a daily basis they leave and they go and they repair the tissues. That's called autologous or self-parabiosis. It is occurring in every one of us. In every one of us. It's the rejuvenating process that occurs that allows us to stay healthy up until a certain point. And so if we understand how the stem cells remain young, then we can continue this process and allow us to stay healthy. But stem cells are not isolated. They live in an environment, and we use a technical term for this. It's called a niche. So those stem cells are continually being circulated and receiving nutrients from the environment in which they live. But they can also be harmed by the environment and the nutrients which they receive. So if someone does not eat well, or their diet is poor, or if they're receiving toxins or infections, or if their genetics are abnormal, or if they're under a lot of stress, those are the things that affects the environment in which the stem cells live, and that causes aging and a depletion of our reserve compartment. So Bill talked about it, and what I was just describing is the process that occurs, that causes inflammation. And inflammation is the secret killer, because as we age, we produce more and more of these cells. They're called senescent cells. These senescent cells produces those factors, which we call inflammatory cytokines. Those inflammatory cytokines circulate throughout the body. They're affecting the organs in different ways. They affect the bone marrow. They kill off the stem cells within the bone marrow, but they're also killing off cells in the brain, in the heart, in the lungs, the kidneys, every single organ. People who have arthritis have inflammation, that's localized inflammation, but usually people who have arthritis have also got systemic inflammation as well. This is the fire within us. This fire it affects different people in different ways. I'm sure you know some people who have got Alzheimer's. I'm sure you know some people who have heart disease, or people who have liver failure. It's the inflammatory process which is affecting different organs, but as we age, it can affect all of us. So just to point out again, for those people who are aging rapidly, there's a fire going on within them, and that fire is being triggered by all of these factors. Bill talked about some of them. Our food is probably one of the biggest killers, and the type of food that we eat. The next thing is the environmental pollutions, bacteria and viruses that coexist with us, that often are helpful, because when we are born, we have what's called the development of a normal human microbiome. The bacteria that lives with us actually is there to help our immune system mature properly. But if we become populated with abnormal bacteria, those bacteria, by a process we call epigenetics, transfers signals and genes to our cells, which causes aging and destruction of our cells. And that actually can occur. Viruses, Bill talked about different viruses. Cigarette smoking, we know that the cigarette smoking is one of the biggest killers, but it's not the only one. This, in my opinion, is the biggest stress. When I've looked at patients who come to see me who've had cancer, and I ask them, what's happened in the last 2 years? Invariably, you find that stress is one of the biggest factors. So we spend a lot of our time focusing on what we eat and what we should eat, and we are worrying about a lot of the time. Yes, it is important, but it's not the only important factor. So when we're young, we are in a state of balance. That is, these proteins that we call the cytokines or the inflammatory factors, they're balanced between we call anti and pro or increased inflammatory proteins. Our immune system, it balances it out. So, for example, if inflammation, we want to be very careful. Some inflammation is important because the immune system allows us to use inflammation in an acute setting to overcome infections, to overcome tissue injury, and various things like that. But the problem is that when the inflammation becomes chronic, that's when the damage occurs to the cells, and particularly the stem cells. And so the best way we could describe this would be to think about inflammation, the flame, and the fire. When we are young, we are in a controlled situation, so you have a nice, healthy house. It's the same thing with our bodies. As we get older, the inflammation increases, the flame increases. If our immune system is down, the inflammation becomes uncontrolled because there is nothing to put the fire out, because it's our immune system which actually works like the fire to put the inflammation out And that's when the disease processes occur. It's with this uncontrolled inflammation. And that inflammation, which is often associated with aging, when it goes out of control because of the aging and the defects of the immune system, then disease processes occurs, including cancer, neurological diseases, diabetes, arthritis, wrinkles, cardiovascular disease like stroke, heart failure. Chronic fatigue syndrome is really neuroinflammation occurring in the brain. Whenever you're beginning to feel tired, and as you're getting older and you're beginning to get tired and you're not sleeping well, guess what's going on? Your brain is on fire. And unless you do something about that to remove it, that fire will continue. Eventually, you're destroying nerve cells. And eventually, you will begin to have problems with your memory. So again, I come back to this because the way that we have found to be able to deal with that inflammation is we push these cells out. Now, you might say, well, if we have the reserve tank and we have inflammation and the immune system is the immune system is deteriorating, why don't those cells normally go on repair? The reason is because when inflammation occurs with aging and disease processes, this process stops. Those cells are being blocked. So in somebody who has diabetes, where their immune system is down, where the inflammation is raging, what's happened is that the factors that Bill talked about, the old factors, not the young factors, the old factors actually will block this. What he talked about was that the young factors actually will help to turn these cells on and actually push them out. Now what we're doing is we're sending a surge of these cells from this compartment to repair the immune system and to reduce the inflammation. He talked about, and just going back, these cells of the these cells form the immune system, and I'm just going to go into that in a little bit more detail. We have two types of immune system. Our functional immune system is determined by our innate immune system and our adaptive immune system. And you've heard of B cells and T cells. Well, our adaptive immune system consists of T cells and B cells. Our innate immune system, the most important cell in our innate immune system is our natural killer cells. And so we use the term immune system dysfunction because immune system dysfunction is the precursor to the development of diseases. And we use the term immune risk profile because we can, using a simple blood test, I can take the blood from anyone in this room and I can tell you what your immune risk profile is. And why is that important? Because if we see that your immune risk profile is abnormal, it means that you're going to get diseases like infections. You're going to get cancer. You're going to get chronic inflammation. You're going to get frailty. Those are the types of diseases that are associated with an immune risk profile. The Bill talked about this term called immunosenescence. It's a fancy word for aging of the immune system. As we age, our immune system ages, but the accelerated aging of the immune system causes infections, cancers, autoimmune disorders, chronic inflammatory disorders, and frailty. As Bill said, many times, many elderly patients go into hospitals. They're going to hospital with heart attacks, or they go into hospital for various other procedures, perhaps to have hip replacements. And what happens is they go into the hospitals, they get infections, and they die. And the reason for that is because of this process we call immune aging. We know about it because as a stem cell transplant physician, we've seen it. We know that the immune system of the stem cells ages, and particularly the cells that forms the immune system. And this immune senescence is characterized by those diseases that I've talked to you about. So our reality is that unless we do something about it, unless we learn more and we become educated about how we need to preserve our immune system, then this is what's going to happen. It's an unhealthy aging trajectory associated with the onset of diseases a diminished quality of life, and an increased mortality risk. And so my question to you today is, how many of you know somebody who has this condition? Everyone does. But how many of you know somebody like the lady I showed, the young lady who lived to be 115? And isn't that's where we all want to be, and it can be achieved. So I use another example. Here we see two esteemed leaders who we knew about, and this is what they looked like when they were in their prime. Their objective was world peace. This is what they looked like later. And then, as I mentioned to you before, what was the news that you begin to hear about them? Mandela back in hospital, serious conditions, infections. After readmitted to hospital with a renewed lung infection. And the story went on. How many times did he go back and forth into hospital with infections, and what did he subsequently die of? And that was because of the aging of his immune system and the T-cell immunosenescence. We also heard the same thing and saw in the newspapers about George Bush. And I use these because these were famous people who we know. We saw them in their prime, but then we also saw what happened to them. And that's called a chronic critical illness. And in the United States, there are 100,000 people every year and currently in hospitals who have this illness. And the mortality is very high. It's 50% in 1 year. And 12% of these patients die. Only 12% of these people are actually released from the hospital and become functionally ill. Isn't that a huge waste of resources? I mean, to think about the fact that you have 100,000 people occupying beds in the hospitals and the intensive care units, and we're spending an average of about $500,000 to keep them there, and then only 12% of them will come out and be functionally effective, and the rest of them are going to go, either die or go into further nursing homes and be supported there until eventually something happens to them. And the healthcare cost, $20 billion annually. And these are the precursors of those diseases, all of these. And diabetes is the biggest. 26 million people affected in the United States, 241 million worldwide. And what's the process? It's that chronic inflammatory process and the immune dysfunction which is driving the disease process. And this slide just basically shows that if we continue at the same rate, we will have no money for anything else apart from the revenue that comes in from our taxes, because our healthcare, as our baby boomer population is growing, and as they develop these chronic diseases, and we're spending $20 billion in just keeping them in the hospital to support them while they have infections that they are not going to recover from, then it's to me, in my opinion, we need to do something about it. And so we need to study and we need to understand what keeps us healthy. And one of the most important things is the immune system. And our immune system is essential to healthy longevity and cancer resistance. And one of the most important components of that are our natural killer cells. And these cells are designed to kill cancer cells, and they can predict cancer and resistance to overall longevity. And this is a complicated slide, but I'm just pointing out here, I showed you before, innate immunity, adaptive immunity, natural killer cells, T cells, B cells. We can measure this, and we can tell you which component of your immune system is broken down, and that's part of your immune risk profile. And this slide, which I'm going to show you a very neat video, which I think is very exciting. But this is a natural killer cell here. And these are cancer cells. So these are natural killer cells. And what it's doing here, and you'll see it in the video, it's got like fingers, and it grabs the cancer cell, and then it sticks this spear through it. And this is like a spear that it's driving to kill the cancer cell. It didn't play, so sorry. Anyway, I've been talking about the immune system, and so we do a test which is called the immune risk profile. And this is the most advanced way to look at the immune system available today. It looks at the immune system from the stem cell all the way to the effector cells, and it measures cellular function. And what's the significance of measuring that? Well, if you look at those people who have a no immune risk profile, their mortality is decreased, morbidity is good, good quality of life. The people who have an immune risk profile, this is what happens to them. And it's the majority of people because unless we have a lifestyle program to first of all identify what our immune risk profile is, correct it, and then go back after the root causes to fix those, then eventually as we age, this process gets worse. What's the evidence that having a no immune risk profile predicts for longevity? This paper shows us very clearly that those individuals who have a no immune risk profile and who reach 100 years, and this was done in a Swedish known immune longitudinal study, it showed that this immune risk profile selected for those individuals who survived to 100 years and had healthy aging. So we want to measure it. We want to measure our proteins that are responsible for inflammation. We want to measure the immune system, and we want to identify the deficiencies that are occurring early so that we can do something about it. Now, the question is, if you do a test, as I've been trained, and if we do a test, there's not much point doing a test unless you can do something about it, because what you're going to do is scare somebody because you're going to do the test and say, well, you have these deficiencies or you have these abnormalities. But unless you can do something about it, it's not worth doing it. We can. This immune dysfunction that we're talking about, we're working and we've been able to show that we can correct it, and it's more prevalent than you think. I've had couples who've come in to see me, and both of them leading healthy lives. Sorry, this. Yep. So I've had couples who've come in to see me, both of them, both leading healthy lives. And they say, well, we should be fine. We find one spouse has a severely abnormal immune system, the other one is healthy, and they're both leading healthy lives, but in fact they're not, because often you find that one of them is severely stressed and the other one is not, or one of them is actually taking something which they feel that they should not, that is fine, and they're actually they're in their overabundance to promote health, they're actually harming themselves. So we've got to be able to find a way to be able to look at that. And this is an example of the test that we do. We look at the immune profile, we look at the inflammation, we look at the immune cells, the neutrophils, the lymphocytes, the T cells, the naive cells, we look at the natural killer cells, and we look at the balance of the immune system. And this gives me an ability to tell somebody what their immune risk profile is and what needs to be corrected. So once the immune system, the dysfunction is identified, we can take corrective action. And being proactive can save you time, money, energy, resources, and help you on your path to healthy recovery. I'm sorry. So if we have somebody who has immune dysfunction, can we identify who they are? Well, we don't. If we just need to go to the cancer clinics and the oncology clinics, and every single person who is attending there for cancer has got immune system dysfunction. And I want to tell you the story about this patient. This is one of the patients who came to see me, and he had severe immune dysfunction because he was diagnosed with cancer. But his cancer was very far advanced. He had a very aggressive lymphoma. His lymphoma had spread to his neck, his lungs, his abdomen, his pelvis, and it was a very aggressive lymphoma. He was being seen by 5 oncologists, or he had seen 5 oncologists, and each one of them basically said to them that he only had 3 to 4 days to live. And therefore the question would be, what should we do? So he came to see me, and I felt that we should give him the chance to be able to do, to live, because nobody should make that determination. As doctors, we are not God. We have to do everything that we can to help patients, and working hand in hand with God, we can, because we are just instruments of His work. And so Louis Masucci had a very strong faith. And so what we did was we approached it from the perspective of, could we shrink his cancer, but without giving him extensive dosages of chemotherapy and radiation, which would just cause further damage to his already severe immune dysfunction. And at the same time, could we work to boost his immune system? And over a period of 9 months, that's what we did. And I'm very pleased to say that 5 years later, 5+ years later, Louis Masucci, after only 9 months of treatment, we became completely free of his cancer and is alive today and leads a normal, healthy life. The reason why I give this story is because it's to give hope to every single patient with cancer that it is possible to be able to help patients with cancer if we can just understand and learn more about what needs to be done and what needs to be done early. And what was it that we could use to predict Louis Masucci's survival? And what we did was we measured his natural killer cell function. And this has been corroborated by multiple studies, including the ones here, which are survival curves. But it's again, those cells that I talked to you about. I measured his natural killer cell function after we finished his treatment, and I've continued to measure it on an ongoing basis, and we know that he's surviving because his natural killer cell function has come back up and it has stayed up. Fortunately, he came to see me and he did not receive extensive dosages of chemotherapy. Now, I wanted to qualify, I'm not against chemotherapy, but I feel that we need to use it in a targeted way. We need to use the chemotherapy to shrink the cancer, but we don't expect the chemotherapy is going to cure the patient. What cures the patient is actually their immune system, and we call this their host versus tumor response. And that's what we want in all of us to be at a high level. That's what we measure. And these cells predict for our longevity, and they predict for our long-term health. And everything that we do which damages our immune system, including stress, can push these cells down and impair their function. And we want these cells to be as strong as possible. And this is a picture of Louis Masucci, which was taken not so long ago. I keep in touch with him on a regular basis. He's a picture of health, and he and his wife. And so if we can do that for someone like Louis Masucci, we can do it for everyone. And in fact, in last year, in 2014, Science magazine basically publicized that the way that we are going to treat cancer is really immunotherapy. Well, many years ago, when we pioneered the use of using an individual's own stem cells, that's what we were doing. We were doing stem cell transplantation is really immunotherapy. So we pioneered it, and it's a standard of care for treating cancer. What we're saying is that stem cell transplantation or stem cell modulation using our own stem cells is the way to treat all of these diseases of aging that are associated with chronic immune dysfunction and inflammation, including aging. If the immune system and recovering the immune system, as we've shown in cancer, can occur, and we can cure patients of cancer, then how about chronic diseases? And by the way, I also would like to ask you to extend a round of applause to Bill Faloon. Because if it was not for Bill, we would not have been able to get that cancer clinical trial ongoing and the work that we're doing now. So we owe him, the gratitude we owe him, and the millions of people who, once we've completed the study, who will benefit from it, will be eternally indebted to him. So thank you. So what I want to look at now are some of the chronic diseases, the diseases of inflammation, like neuroinflammation, diabetes, and these other diseases, and what we are doing using a similar approach. That is, using the individual's own stem cells to improve the immune system and reduce inflammation. And I'm going to just go through some of these cases with you. Again, many of these cases are patients who, like Louis Masucci, was seen at the top centers around the country and were told that there was nothing could be done. The objective of showing you this is the fact that if we take these cases where everybody else has failed, and we can show that using the understanding we have of the immune system and the way that the immune system works and the way that inflammation causes diseases, and we can reverse it, it means that there's a lot more hope, that we can use simple processes, safe treatments, effective treatments, without having to depend on some of the most expensive drugs which are very toxic and which cause a lot of side effects. So the first area or topic I want to talk about is actually inflammation. And we've been working with patients who've had Parkinson's disease and other strokes, and I'm going to show you a few examples of some of these patients who basically were told that there was nothing else that could be done. Now, to understand what's going on in the brain of people who have Alzheimer's disease or even have memory loss, we need to understand that. Remember I showed you about the silent killer, the uncontrolled flame? That's what's going on. And that's triggered by these cells. They're called glial cells. They're the macrophages, they're the monocytes, they're the cells which are there to normally help us to build our immune system up. But something happens where they're chronically exposed to toxins, bacteria, fungi, viruses, etc., and they become activated. And when they become activated, they are like these red cells here. Any minor damage that occurs to the nerve cells, they pounce on it because they're assuming that it's an infection of viruses. And these microglial cells, when they become activated, they produce that chronic inflammation. And as they produce the chronic inflammation, they continue to destroy the cells that they're supposed to be protecting. And that's the basis of most of these chronic diseases of the brain, the neuroinflammatory diseases. So I want to tell you the story of this patient, and I give her name because this article about her treatment recently appeared in a magazine called Legatus, and she's given full disclosure and for us to discuss her story. She was diagnosed in 2013 with a neurological problem where she began to have symptoms, and they were unusual symptoms where she wasn't aware of what was going on with her right hand. She noticed that she had symptoms where people had noticed that she was losing her sense of smell, she was losing her facial expressions, she was losing her balance, she was actually having difficulty walking, she was falling. So she was seen by her local neurologist in Las Vegas, and she was initially given a diagnosis of a stroke. She was thought to have a stroke. However, she felt that she needed a second opinion, so she went to one of the top movement disorders programs in San Francisco, and there she was diagnosed with a condition called corticobasilar degeneration. This is a form of Parkinson's. But what she was told is that there was nothing that could, she was told, according to her husband, we were told that there was nothing that could be done. There was no cure, said Jerry, Linda's husband. The Staffords were advised to quit their jobs and enjoy what time Linda had left. Patients diagnosed with the disease are typically given 5 years to live. She heard about the work that we were doing, and she began her 6-week protocol treatment with me. And following that, Linda experienced significant improvement. A unified Parkinson's disease rating scale, which is used to measure Parkinson's and other neurological diseases, improved dramatically. His score went from 33 to 12. She dramatically improved, Jerry agreed. Everything improved. She got movement back in her left arm. Jerry says he's overjoyed to see Linda returning to her old self. And that's what she looks like now. So here's an example of how, using the same processes that I've been describing, where we can push the stem cells from that reserve compartment into the compartment that forms the immune system, and we can push the immune system up and reduce the neuroinflammation in the brain. And that's all I did. And that's what caused this dramatic improvement. medications that she's been taking for inflammation, including the anti-acid drugs that she was taking, like Prilosec and Nexium. That has improved. And we also measured her lung functions, and we saw a significant improvement in her lung function. So this process, not only did it help to repair the skin, but it's also repairing the organs as well. And it's very dramatic because there is really no other treatment for these patients. So everyone must be asking the question, well, you're showing all these very severe cases, you're showing cancer. Well, we don't have that, but what can we do to be able to maintain our health? And the message is very simple. We know that, you've seen the slide before, everyone needs to think about whether they've got a fire burning within them. Many times we'll know, many times we do not know. If we do know that there's a fire burning inside of us, we need to go back and look at all of these root causes and identify which ones are causing it. Because if we don't, then the fire will continue burning. And when the fire continues burning and the immune system stops working, that's when the diseases and the major diseases are going to occur. What you can also do is you could measure your immune system even if you're not sick. You could actually get a barometer or picture of where your immune system is now and see what can be done. And the good news is that the work that we are doing, we can show in severe illnesses that we can improve and correct. So somebody who has a mild abnormality of their immune system, the results are even better. And that's what we can do. Now, the fountain of youth. This is the solution. Bill talked about GDF11. Now, GDF11 is one cytokine. The real message is that the stem cells, young stem cells, produces growth factors and what we call these paracrine factors, and it's a combination of things that actually does the rejuvenation effect. They are called cytokines, they are called growth factors, they are called exosomes. They actually transfer the DNA from one cell to another cell. And so if you think about it this way, when we talk, we communicate with each other with our voices. But cells actually talk to each other in a different way. They come and they dock close to each other. The young stem cells will dock close to the aging cells and will then begin a process of transferring the young factors into the old cells. And that's how it works to rejuvenate. So the fountain of youth, according to the author of that study, for that young 115-year-old lady I showed you right at the beginning, her conclusion was that the possibility of rejuvenating aging bodies is by injecting people with stem cells saved from early in their lives. So even though you're 60 or 65, you still have enough stem cells within that reserve compartment that we could still take some and put it back in. Now, for those people in whom it's depleted, the study that we're developing is basically to ask young people to donate some of their cells, and we take the liquids that's surrounding it, called the plasma, surrounding those stem cells, because that contains all of these rejuvenating factors, and our objective is to infuse it back into those individuals in whom we feel that their opportunity for saving their own stem cells and using their own stem cells has been lost. And this is again something that Bill has seen that in the work that we are doing and the experience we have of using the young blood for treating cancer patients. Now we want to extend that using the same thing for treating aging and frailty. I decided that with the knowledge that I had and I acquired over so many years, that the natural thing would be for me to store my own stem cells and for that of my family. And so the younger you do it for your families, it's a legacy. It's, to me, knowing the experience that I've had in terms of treating all these severe illnesses, it's the best thing that we could do. It's the best type of health insurance that we could have for ourselves. And I'm just going to, the collection process is very simple. It's the same as going to the blood bank to give platelets. It's not complicated. It's a very safe procedure. In the United States, on an annual basis, we have 10,000 people who have stem cell transplants, and they require donors. And those donors are taken from people who sign up with the National Marrow Donor Program. Those young donors are actually they're altruistic. They're taking their own stem cells and giving it to somebody else who has a disease, an incurable disease. What I'm saying to you, let's just shift the paradigm a little bit. Yes, it's good to donate to everybody else, but do it for yourself too. Take some of your own and put it away as your future for your maintaining your healthy aging. We know that during this process, and this is a very complicated slide, but the simple message is that when a healthy person does this process, and it's over a week, what they do is they boost their own immune system 7 to 14-fold. So those people who are actually donating cells to somebody else, they're actually being helped. But if we boost our own immune system 7 to 14-fold and we take some and we put it away, now we've got a healthy immune system for the future, and we will never need another person's cells. And we won't need somebody from the National Marrow Donor Program, because if you go back and you look at the statistics for finding a donor from the National Marrow Donor Program, it's not very good. There are huge disparities based upon ethnicity. People from the Afro-Caribbean area, their chances of finding a donor are significantly less, like around 21%, compared to Caucasians, where it's still only 50%. Asians, their chances of getting a donor are less. It's about 29%. So we all think that nothing is ever going to happen to us. And we also depend on somebody else providing it for us, but we can do something to help ourselves. And this to me is one of the most important things that we could do for our health and for our families. This is an interesting slide, and I want to finish soon with this slide, that Bill talked about naive and memory cells. And what it shows is that at birth, when we collect our baby's cord blood, that they're not very memory cells. We have lots of naive cells. And so many people ask the question, should we collect our baby's stem cells and store it? The answer is yes. Because you're storing the cells, a lot of naive cells for your baby, which later on could be used to repair that baby's immune system. What about at puberty? Again, if you missed the chance at birth, at puberty or older, between the ages of 17 and 35, our immune system is at its most powerful. That's the time when you want to take your immune system and your stem cells and store it. In adulthood, it decreases. This is the age of 65 to 74. At this point, the incidence of cancer is 2,000 times greater than it is at this point, where the incidence of cancer is virtually zero. If we want to move from here to here, a nice way is actually take our stem cells and put it back in, and we will push ourselves back on that curve. Like that. So these are other diseases that later on, as we are showing more and more evidence that these diseases can be used, they are neuroinflammatory diseases, they're inflammatory disorders, the stem cells work by reducing inflammation and boosting the immune system. It's only natural in time that this is going to occur, that we will be able to do that. Another thing, and this is just now really using the technology, going back to Bill's first slide, the first slide that he talked about. Our Creator gave us the ability to create things, to allow ourselves to be able to live longer. And this is how it's being done. This is called a 3D printer. It's a 3D printer, and in there are stem cells. And with that 3D printer, we can take the cells that are being collected and stored, and we can recreate tissues. So in the future, we may want to recreate a piece of lung or a piece of liver or a piece of the trachea, as has been done here. You strip the cells off the donor, and then you spray the cells back on, and now you've got a recreated part of a tissue. This is where the technology is. This is not 10 years away. This is now. The use of this 3D printer is being worked on at many centers. So here's where we are. This is a call to action. Let's do something about it. And so I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to ask Bill and Neal whether there is time for me. I've talked a lot, and I hope I've given you a lot of information. But I also want to ask the members of the audience if the education I've provided to you today has given you food for thought and then a call for action. And so if you could just show me your hands whether this process has been helpful to you, that would be extremely, and thank you very much. We appreciate it.
I can't tell you how impressed I was with that presentation, and I've been working with Dr. Maharaj now for about 3 or 4 years, and I learned something there.